You're in the water loop.
Waterloop is made possible in part by grants from Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation.
Waterloop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by Flume. It's the perfect device for tracking your home's water use in real time on your smartphone. It's so easy to use. You just attach a small device to your water meter using a band, the same way you put a watch on your wrist. Then you connect to Wi-Fi, you download the app, and you're up and running. It's as simple as that. You don't need a plumber. You don't need to cut into any of your pipes or water lines. Very easy to set up. Then you can set water budgets, how much you want to use each day or week. It'll keep track of that. It'll tell you what's going on in your house with water use minute by minute. It'll send alerts to you if there's excessive water use or if it suspects a leak. In fact, when I installed Flume at my house, it told me almost right away about a leak. I was losing a gallon of water every 6 minutes. I'm honestly not sure when I would have found that without Flume. You can use promo code WATERLOOP for 10% off at flumewater.com.
Waterloop.
Water conservation is very important to me, and I bet it is to all of you. That's why I use High Sierra shower heads in my house, and I'm so happy to have them as a supporter of this podcast. High Sierra carries the EPA WaterSense label for efficiency and uses 40% less water than conventional low-flow shower heads. 40%. The model I have uses just 1.5 gallons per minute. And because of their unique nozzle design, it's patented. Nobody else has it. It maximizes efficiency of water and energy use, but doesn't sacrifice on performance. You still get a powerful shower. Use promo code WATERLOOP for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is the host, Travis. Going to be talking about the California coast today with Sean Bothwell. He is the executive director of the California Coastkeeper Alliance. Sean, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, as I was, trying to prepare for this podcast, I was looking at the work that you all do and looking at maps of California even, and just, it's a huge place, right? And you guys deal with all these coastal issues, the ocean issues, but then all the freshwater and what's going on inland. And so I'd love to hear what it's like trying to take all that on at once.
I mean, it's personally exciting, I think. We really feel like our main focus is land-based sources of pollution that cause water quality problems in the ocean. So we really focus most of our work on that land-sea interface. Our name's a little misleading. We do actually do a lot of inland issues. We have inland water keepers that we represent in Sacramento. So we have, for example, a Yuba water keeper and a Klamath River keeper. And so, it keeps things interesting to have that diversity. And, you get to work with different stakeholders, depending on what issue it is. And you get to work with different agencies and get to know, different, high-level decision makers. So it makes it exciting. But we really try to, even some of our freshwater work, we really try to find a lens for how that also can improve ocean quality health. And in fact, we just released Ocean Climate Resiliency Action Plan. And what we did there was really take a lot of our Clean Water Act work that we do on fresh water issues and look at how we can make our ocean coast more climate resilient through the lens of the Clean Water Act and some of the freshwater solutions that we've also been pitching. We do take on a lot. My water keepers always say, you need to focus in, but we get good achievements too. And I think, overall the water keepers, we're aggressive, but I think we make a lot of progress because we're pragmatic. We're not asking for crazy things, and we really try to be solutions oriented. So rather than, just state the problem or complain about a certain permit or policy, we actually provide, red line edits of exactly what we want to see and what the solutions are we're pushing. And so I think that's made it more manageable as we kind of break down each of our program areas. And then it's just really helpful. So we have about 15 waterkeepers in California, and they're all very on the ground watershed based. And so they're able to bring their local issues up to a statewide level, explain what's going on the ground, and we're able to implement or fix whatever those problems are through whether it's legislation or state policy. And so I think that relationship between the local waterkeepers and California Coastkeeper Alliance is really powerful to bring that voice of the local groups up to Sacramento, because Sacramento can get somewhat insulated at times where they don't know exactly what the key watershed issues are that need to be addressed. So.
Yeah. Well, so for this conversation today, we'll focus on the coast, and hope to connect with you later to talk kind of about the freshwater and inland side of things. I'm a big fan of the California coast. It's spectacular. It's so diverse. I'm a surfer. You got lots of great waves all over the place there. Great lifestyle. Could you just kind of give the basic stats on like the size of the California coast and how you describe it?
Yeah, the coast is about 1,100 square miles from San Diego to the Oregon border. And we do have waterkeepers that cover all of those watersheds along the coast. And the way I think about it, I break it down into somewhat 4 regions. There's, Southern California from San Diego basically to Santa Barbara. And, that's a lot of sandy beaches, famous, surf areas with a very heavily urbanized area. And we can get into some of those issues of what those water quality impacts are. And then you have the Channel Islands that are kind of part of that Southern California focus. But again, very beach surfer kind of thought of. And then on the Central Coast, you have Big Sur, you have the Monterey Coast with, rocky reefs and huge kelp beds with sea otters. It's really just a beautiful place. It's less urbanized. But one thing that I think a lot of folks don't appreciate is just the amount of agriculture actually that's just off the coast of Monterey. About 80% of all of our leafy greens, artichokes, Brussels sprouts, all of that comes from the kind of the Salinas Valley there, and the watershed runs off into the Monterey Bay. So you have this really agricultural productive area along with a very pristine coastline, and it takes some work to manage that. Then you have the San Francisco Bay, which is kind of a separate entity. It's regulated somewhat differently than the rest of the coast, but a lot of ports. California as a whole have 11 ports overall. Oakland, Los Angeles, and Long Beach are 3 of the biggest in the country. And I believe Long Beach and Los Angeles is the 6th busiest in the world. So there's a lot of port activity in both those areas. And then you have the North Coast, which is a lot of just redwood trees and kind of really quiet areas where you don't get a lot of people there. The Sonoma Coast, people go visit that, but you get up further north to Humboldt area, and there's some really pristine, quiet stretches of land that really no one ever visits. But it's well taken care of, and it's kind of just a beautiful spot. So there's a lot of diversity throughout the coast.
Yeah, when I've talked to people about California, they talk about going to the LA and Southern California and San Francisco, and I'm always surprised how few people have gotten into Big Sur or the northern part. I'm like, you got to go. They're just spectacular, just unbelievable. So
yeah, I've been living up. I grew up in Southern California, but I've spent the last 10 years up here, and I'm still just discovering little pocket beaches everywhere along the coast where you basically spend the whole day and not see anyone. But it's like the most beautiful place, and people just don't realize just how fortunate we are with all the diversity we have along the coast.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. I love that you mentioned before about your focus on solutions, because I want to kind of talk about that as we move on. But first, how would you frame like the biggest challenges for California's coast? I know there's a lot and they're diverse, but what would you kind of put in the top slots for challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any environmental issue, you need to start with climate change and the main impacts from that, and then you kind of work your way out. So, sea level rise and ocean acidification are the 2 biggest threats to the California coast. Obviously sea level rise is more of a kind of a human safety concern. and we can get into solutions for how we better prepare for that. Ocean acidification is the issue that isn't brought up enough. I don't think enough of the public actually knows about ocean acidification and hypoxia, but that is actually, just me personally, the most troubling thing on the horizon, because basically the oceans are absorbing the carbon in our atmosphere, and it's making our oceans more acidic. And when the ocean's more acidic, marine species that have shells basically can't create shells. And if you think about our food web, if the lowest critters can't form shells, then that disrupts our entire food chain all the way up to orca whales that rely on those type of shelled organisms to live off. And so that's really concerning to us, and an area we've really been focused on, because there are water quality solutions we can do to get at ocean acidification.
Well,
I think a lot of
I was going to say, let's stay on the climate, on the sea level rise and acidification topic then for a little bit, because it's definitely very interesting. And so you guys are seeing the impacts on the California coast. You're seeing these shellfish not being able to develop shells, and then you're seeing that lack of food for up the food chain. That's already happening, huh?
It started in Washington, actually. Oyster growers have been really noticing it, but yeah, we work with a lot of businesses along the coast that do raise oyster shells, and they are seeing impacts here in California. And the West Coast is going to be one of the hardest hit with ocean acidification. And so, a lot of folks see it as, well, it's a global problem because of the amount of carbon we have in the atmosphere, which is true. But there are solutions that California and other states can take now to prevent what I call ocean acidification hotspots, areas that it's not just from global climate change. The pH, the acidity is actually lower in these areas because of man-made stressors from the coast. And that's really what California Coastkeeper has been focused on over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I really wasn't familiar with that concept of like the hot spots for acidification. That's very interesting. So what is it that's fueling those? Is something coming from the land, some type of pollution coming from the land?
Yeah, it's primarily nutrients, but the sources of it. So there's been a study being done in Southern California, but it's being done by the state, on looking at wastewater facilities, and their discharge of wastewater into the ocean is actually causing these hotspots. And we've known that for a couple of years now, but they've really been looking at, well, does the currents then move it away, or do they actually stay there and have an impact on the biological marine life? And that's where the science is going, that yes, in fact, the wastewater facilities are causing these hotspots. So that's the main stressor, but also stormwater runoff. Agricultural runoff has a lot of nutrients in it, which causes harmful algae blooms, these toxic blooms that when they die off then lowers the pH and the acidity as well. And so those are the main drivers of it, and where we've been really trying to tackle improving those land stressors so that we don't have those hotspots here in California.
So that's the local level solution, is trying to reduce the nutrients coming off the land or out of certain facilities. Yeah,
and again, what I said at the beginning of, we've been working on some of these issues for a while now, of improving stormwater runoff so that we're capturing it and using it as a resource. California has really been moving in that direction, where we used to treat stormwater and then let it run off. Now we try to capture it and infiltrate it into the ground because we need it for our groundwater supplies. On agricultural runoff, we're looking at, in fact, there's a hearing today on limiting the amount of nutrients put onto fields for irrigated agriculture. Same with dairies, we're trying to get at making sure dairies control their nutrient runoff so it's not polluting our rivers and then ending up in the ocean. And then for the wastewater folks, what we've really been pushing over the last few years is really to recycle all of our ocean wastewater. There's a study, or some data has just came out. There's going to be a hearing in a couple of weeks, but 1.7 million acre feet of water is discharged to the ocean every year. And that's a lot of water that we could be recycling. California is the leader in the country on potable reuse regulation, so drinkable recycled water. We have one of the most cutting edge facilities down in Orange County that for years now, for a couple decades, has been recycling water to the level that it's drinkable and then putting it into the groundwater basin. We also have new facilities coming online or being proposed that will put it into reservoirs, surface open reservoirs. And California Coastkeeper and water reuse, the water recycling industry, we actually passed a law a couple of years ago that California will have what's called direct potable reuse regulations by 2023. And so that's going to allow to eliminate the environmental buffer, either the groundwater basin or the aquifer, and deliver recycled water directly to the distribution system, so it goes directly to your home. And when we get there, it's going to be a pretty pivotal moment, because right now certain communities have barriers to doing water recycling. So, for example, San Diego didn't have a groundwater basin to infiltrate the water into, and so that's why they needed a surface reservoir system. But in a couple of years, when anyone can put it directly into the distribution system, really no one has an excuse for discharging that ocean wastewater into the ocean. And the reason we think that's really important, besides just getting at ocean acidification, is, California moves water all around the state, right? And that is our largest energy driver, is pumping water from the Delta or the Colorado River or Mono Lake, pumping it up over the hills and into the Los Angeles region. And if we do that, and then we just discharge it out into the ocean without reusing it and recycling it, and we have the ability to recycle it. So that's really where we've been pushing over the last couple of years, is making sure we get to recycling all ocean wastewater. The State Water Board in 2018 actually passed a state goal to recycle all ocean wastewater that could be used for drinkable purposes. And then this year, the Ocean Protection Council adopted an complete ocean strategy that requires 85 to 90% of wastewater to be recycled by 2040. So that gets us at our water supply problems down in Southern California, but also starts to limit the amount of nutrients and wastewater that's being put into the ocean, so that we can stop these ocean acidification hotspots.
Yeah, so that old reduce, reuse, recycle really applies to water now too, right? That's awesome. Very cool. So on the sea level rise side of things, I'm on the East Coast, so I have that East Coast orientation a lot of times. I know Florida and, the Norfolk, Virginia area. I know a lot of these communities are really getting hit with sea level rise. California is less flat, right? You start to get land pretty quickly. But so tell me more about what's projected for sea level rise for California and what that means for coastal communities.
Yeah, so for one, the projections are always changing, right? And they seem to be getting worse, where as more carbon's in the atmosphere, the projections increase. Right now, I think where the state is at is we're expecting a 1 foot sea level rise by 2030. About a 3 foot rise by 2050, and then about 10 feet by 2100.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
that's
a lot. And we have a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of roads. We have a lot of our economy that's just right up along the coast, and we need to take it seriously, particularly in the Bay Area. There's already large areas that are basically behind seawalls, where they're at risk, similar to, take New Orleans and their issues of they're basically under sea level, and same with certain areas in the Bay Area. And we have just infrastructure, we have trains, we have our highways are just right up along the coast there. So those are really the areas we need to start addressing. And there's about 3,500 miles of road that are at risk by 2050. And the Ocean Protection Council, just in their new strategic plan, they're working to be resilient to 3.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 is the state goal right now, is for us to either armor the coast and put seawalls up, which has definitely its drawbacks, but in certain areas it's just going to be necessary, right? There's certain cities that we can't move the entire San Francisco, bayfront, and so seawalls are just going to be necessary in certain areas. But in other areas, we're looking at how we can do managed retreat, areas that make sense to move infrastructure back In some areas, maybe we just have to raise roads. But really, there's the soft solutions of looking at sand dunes and wetland restoration. We've lost a lot of our wetlands over the years, where that's an area, of focus of not only just restoring our wetlands and building them up for sea level rise, but also allowing them to retreat back with sea level rise. If you have a hard structure and the sea's rising, so the wetlands are moving back, it's only so far they can go until we start losing them. So it's really that combination of protecting the areas that we can't move back, retreating in areas where it makes sense, and then protecting our ecosystems and soft habitats, both seagrass, kelp beds, oyster beds. All of that type of restoration is really important, and it goes to California's blue economy. We're doing a lot more on seaweed restoration and seaweed economics and oyster restoration. And so it's all part of the blue economy that California is trying to push.
Yeah. Big price tags when you're talking about a lot of that hard infrastructure, right? Seawalls and raising roads and rebuilding in different places. Big dollar amounts. I saw something about the state's first sea level rise regulations. What's that?
So the Coastal Commission, which is the entity that regulates, houses being built on the coast, any type of coastal projects. They in 2015 came out with guidance to their both the permit writers and the planning units of how to address sea level rise. And so basically permit by permit, they need to look at how either we're putting a seawall in and protecting, or the retreat, or some way to protect it. And particularly looking at new infrastructure, because it's unfortunate, but folks are still planning wastewater facilities and power plants and desal facilities in areas where we know is going to be underwater in 30 years. And yet these projects are 50-year projects. And so that's really where the Coastal Commission is trying to get to. We actually just introduced a bill yesterday with Assemblymember Petrie Norris, looking at getting other agencies to really develop their permits through the lens of climate change and the lens of sea level rise. And in particular, we are trying to get the state to not put state funding into infrastructure projects that they know in the lifetime of the project are going to be in these sea level rise zones. There's a lot of different programs that give money for infrastructure, and we don't want to encourage those projects being sited in sea level rise areas.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we spoke about how managing for sea level rise can be expensive. One success story California has been working on over the last couple of years is what we call beneficial reuse. And what's going on is the Federal Army Corps, they dredge all of the ports and harbors, mostly in San Francisco, but also in Los Angeles and Long Beach. And they are required to dispose of that sediment the cheapest way possible. That's a federal requirement. And so even though the state has all these areas that need sediment for wetland restoration, the Federal Corps has been dumping it. They drive the sediment 55 miles off the coast and just dump it overboard. And so we've been working with the state and the Army Corps to set up a program where basically California pays the incremental difference between disposing it offshore and instead putting it into our wetland restoration projects. And it's really gotten a lot of bipartisan support because the state is going to have to pay for these wetland restoration projects anyway, and they need to find sediment. And so rather than just dumping good sediment out to the ocean, what we do is we pay the incremental difference, which is really pennies on the dollar, to do these wetland restoration projects in the Bay Area. And we're hoping to make it a statewide program in the coming year. So that's really a way that the state can save money while also adapting to sea level rise that we think is really important and hope will continue. Yep.
I know one of the other pressures on California's coast that you all talk about is from energy, meaning drilling for oil, power plants, even desalination. How does the energy sector put different pressures on the coast?
Yeah, the oldest time one and the one most people think of is just oil drilling. We have pretty extensive oil drilling off the Santa Barbara Channel in federal waters. And I think most people know of the infamous the 1969 Santa Barbara spill that pretty much wiped out the coast there. So we have drilling. We also have container ships coming into San Francisco Bay. Mostly has had numerous spills over the last decade where they've either ran into the Bay Bridge. I recall one time when I worked in the Bay Area. So they have spills every so often. And then also just pipeline safety. Recently, in 2015, there was a pipeline that burst in Santa Barbara and polluted, really just destroyed an entire beach. And so those are kind of the three threats from oil development over the years. We also have a lot of power plants that line our coast, as you mentioned. And these power plants, they're built on the coast because they cool down their generators by taking in ocean seawater. And actually, we worked with the State Water Board for about a decade. The State Water Board adopted what they call the once-through cooling policy in 2010. And that policy is requiring all these power plants to no longer take in ocean seawater to cool down their generators because it killed just millions of marine life. There was so much water being sucked into these facilities at such a high velocity that literally they would have to go out and scrape sea lions, sea turtles, large fish off the grates to these intakes. And that's not even talking about the eggs that go past the screens and just die in the generators. And they did, it's just a study of just the billions amount of marine life that was being destroyed by these facilities. So California was really proactive and is now phasing out those power plants. And those power plants are either, a lot of them just shut down because they weren't efficient anymore. Some are retrofitting and will stay in. But because of our AB 32, our cap and trade law in California, we are largely going to renewables. So a lot of the facilities, rather than retrofit so they don't take in the seawater, they're just shutting down because we have so much solar or wind now. And then the last thing you mentioned, ocean desalination facilities. There's one large facility in Carlsbad right now, and that facility was largely controversial. What's really happening is these desal facilities are being what's called co-located with the power plants. So basically, they want to come and use the exact same pipes that are now illegal under the once-through cooling policy, the ones that they're now phasing out. And unfortunately, the state and the State Water Board and the regional water boards aren't really being protective enough to require them to not co-locate. We passed what's called the Ocean Desalination Policy back in 2015, and that policy was supposed to get the state to really look at subsurface intakes. So rather than use these big open ocean intakes, you would suck water through the sand, similar to how you pump groundwater. And that actually reduces the energy demand on ocean desal. Desal can be about 3 times the energy demand as water recycling. It's the most energy intensive water supply option available. And yet we have these climate change goals, but we're also proposing these ocean desalination facilities. And instead of making them do these subsurface intakes, right now the regional boards, even with this policy that says you need to do subsurface intakes, are still allowing them to be built next to the power plant. And when the power plants are shutting down, they now use the same exact intakes to take in seawater to run their desal facilities that are now 3 times the energy demand.
Wow. Well, it's good. It's good to hear that there's, with that movement to renewables, that there's some solutions happening on the power plant front and hopefully the oil front as well, right? Yeah. One of my favorite solutions for the ocean are marine protected areas. I just think they're awesome, and it seems to be the most common sense thing to basically, not physically fence off, but take a part of the ocean and say, there's no fishing here, there's no X, Y, and Z, and let wildlife do what it needs to do. Could you give a better explanation of what marine protected areas are and how they are beneficial on the California coast and how maybe they've been success stories?
Yeah, I think it's been probably one of California's best success stories, to be honest. We consider them, they're like underwater national parks to us. That's the way we envision them. With climate change, we refer to them now as hope spots because you're right. They're basically areas that are pretty either pristine or very highly productive biologically. And the idea was to protect them so that you can't fish there, you can't drill for oil, or really protected from these other stressors. With the idea that there's so many other stressors from climate change, right? Things that we can't necessarily prevent, like the ocean acidification issues, generally speaking. But we can stop man-made other stressors, right? So fishing is probably the best example, but also just runoff from stormwater is another example. And so the idea was to protect these areas so that they could be very highly biologically significant and essentially spill over, right? So the idea is that all the MPAs are connected to each other. And so this connectivity then better helps just marine biology overall off the coast, not just necessarily in the spot where it was protected. That's the idea behind them. And what we're looking at now is, everyone looks at where we can better protect marine resources. What we've been focused on is really protecting the water quality of those areas. We have things in California called areas of special biological significance. And what those are is they're basically like MPAs, but just for water quality. And they don't necessarily always overlay the marine protected areas. So sometimes, there's about 30, 40% of the areas of special biological significance overlap with the MPAs. There's significant portions that don't have any water quality protections. And so that is something we've been working with the state, looking for the regional boards to start putting these protections over all the MPAs. And in fact, the new ocean plan that the Ocean Protection Council created has a plan in place to have water quality protections for all MPAs in the next couple of years. And so in 2021, that's probably going to be our biggest goal, is starting to set these water quality protections from things like agriculture and urban areas, like with stormwater runoff.
Yeah. I remember seeing articles recently about, scientists calling for 30% of the world's oceans just to be off limits, right? That's what we need to let nature do its thing. Ambitious, that'll be tough to make happen, but sounds nice.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a push not just for ocean, but also for land conservation too. In California, Governor Newsom just signed an executive order actually pushing the state to do just that, protect 30% of ocean coast and then 30% of land. And we think we're, a large way there for the ocean. So, fishermen are certainly nervous about, additional marine protected areas. But I think the state's looking at the land piece as probably the heavier lift, to be honest, just because, yeah.
Well, you establish those marine protected areas, the fish do well, they spill over, like you said, and then there's more fish for the fishermen outside of those areas, But it's that was the entire idea. But fishing's tough, and there's already a lot of other things going on with low flows in the delta, where salmon runs are not as plentiful as they used to be. And also, again, the nutrient loading that's going into the ocean. I talked about the harmful algae blooms. When we have these toxic blooms, it really shuts down the crab industry, for example. It shut it down pretty bad a couple of years ago. And so the fishing industry is already, gets hit really hard with these other stressors. And so, the state needs to find a balance between, making sure we're protecting the areas, but also keeping the fishing industry alive. Sure. Speaking of business, one of the other things I saw you guys involved with is the Blue Business Council. Love to hear that's a positive thing. What's that? Why is it important? How has it been successful?
Yeah, I mean, I said this at the top that we really try to drive pragmatic solutions, and in doing that, we need to work, hand in hand with the industries that we're regulating. And so we try to do that as much as we can. I work very closely with the water recycling industry, for example. We do a lot on stormwater regulations, which can be tough for industry, but at the same time, we work with municipalities to be able to better raise fees for stormwater capture. And so, we work a lot with the side that we're regulating. And we really felt like we wanted to create this Blue Business Council to really speak on on behalf of why it's important to have clean water in California, both for just California's economy, but also for these individual companies' bottom line. And so the companies on the Blue Business Council see environmental regulation and that create clean water and protect our resources as an actual benefit to their business. And so we created, we keep bringing in new companies that really just speak on behalf of why it's important for water quality regulations. And so the council's been around for about 8 years now. They've worked on numerous things from offshore oil to plastic concerns. The state passed a really landmark trash policy back in 2015 that the Blue Business Council helped with. Recently, they've been really focused on microplastics and microfibers from clothing, and also on the ocean acidification issue. I mentioned we work with several shellfish companies that are actually out there monitoring pH in the ocean acidification and what is happening to their resource. And so there's various ways we work with them. A lot of times they'll send letters to the governor, a state agency. But they also helped us craft legislation, and they'll come to Sacramento with us to the Capitol to testify on a bill we're running. Like I said, on the microfibers piece, we're actually running a bill this year that would require new washing machines to have a filter for microfibers, similar to what like a lint trap does in your dryer.
Wow.
Those are coming commercially available in Europe right now. Right now in the United States, you can add it on as a feature. You have to build it in, but in a couple of years, most companies will be putting that into their washing machines. And so we want to set that standard in California to really drive innovation and get them to start doing that sooner rather than later. So that's one of the things we're working on with the Blue Business Council.
I'm glad to talk to you because California is often driving innovation and environmental protection and finding the newest thing to do, and then often other states and parts of the country pick it up. So I hadn't heard about that with the microplastic filter in laundry machines. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, there's so much to talk about with the coast and with the inland waters. I appreciate this conversation a ton, and I really like to catch up again in the future and talk about kind of the inland freshwater side of things a little bit. But thanks so much for this conversation and all the info.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate getting to talk about all the issues we work on. We'd be excited to come back and talk about. There's so many more other freshwater issues going on that I'm sure we would have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and once we get past this coronavirus thing, I personally look forward to getting back out to the West Coast and hanging out there. It's a good spot. So, yeah,
I've been traveling a lot to the Sonoma coast, but I miss Southern California beaches, so I'm looking forward to being able to travel down south again soon.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Sean. All
right. Thank you, Travis.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. A special thanks to Waterloop supporters, Spring Point Partners, and the Walton Family Foundation. The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish way to save energy, water, and money while enjoying a powerful shower. Save 20% with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop is also sponsored by Flume, the smart water monitor that tracks your home's water use in real time and provides data on your smartphone. Save 10% with promo code WATERLOOP at flumewater.com. If you like Waterloop, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on social media and visit waterloop.org to sign up for updates.
You're in the Waterloop.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.